was diagnosed with a very rare form of leukemia when she was 16 years old. And she was basically from then on had 2 years straight in hospital. 1 year in Sydney, which is full of basically highly experimental procedures, a lot of radiation, a lot of chemo, followed by a bone marrow transplant, which her and I were a perfect match for. So I gave her all of my bone marrow, which unfortunately didn't work. It was too strong, and she then went to Melbourne for a further year of treatment in Royal Melbourne, followed another bone marrow transplant as well too. Shannon, I guess I'm a little bit biased. My daughter was the type of girl who always put everyone first, even from a very young age. When we were in hospital, she was always looking out for other people. She would have me wheel her around to other people in other rooms that she knew hadn't had visitors for a couple of days, so she'd actually sit with them. She always checked on me when she woke up in intensive care. The first thing she'd do was say, "Have you eaten? Have you slept?" So she was that sort of a girl. She's a wonderful girl. During our time, I was very fortunate. Shannon and I are best friends anyway. They are best friends. I was fortunate to spend 16, 18 hours every day with her, so I didn't leave her side. And we talked a lot. It was great for me. It probably wasn't great for an 18-year-old girl to hang out every day with your dad, but I loved every second of it. We came into contact with a lot of great people in the hospital, nurses and doctors who are all doing wonderful things. But along the way, we learned that it was the everyday people going through everyday things who were there for treatment themselves or who were helping someone else in the hospital. The little things they did actually got us through. You know, just making little meals for Shannon when she was on chemo and your taste changes constantly. Or remember one of the times Shannon crashed and there was 14 doctors working on her and reviving her, and I just stood there and cried. I didn't know what to do. And a lady on the ward just came up and held me like a mum. Just came up and gave me a cuddle. Her husband died 2 weeks later on the ward. But it's those little things that just people just go out of their way. They're going through so much, and yet they give a little bit more to someone else who needs it. And that really impressed Shannon and I. And we started speaking earlier on about what we could actually do to give back. As things moved along, unfortunately, we ran out of treatment options for Shannon. And they spoke to both of us and said, "Where would you like to be? Where would you like to be when you died? It's going to happen soon." And Shannon said, "I just want to be at home. I haven't been home in 2 years. So I just want to be at home in my bed." And again, I know this is my experience, and I know every single person in this room has been through something. So I'm sorry if this is triggering for you. I'm not trying to do that. It was just how our charity came about, that's all. Shannon came home and she was actually at home for 4 days with me. During that 4 days, it was pretty tough because I didn't know what to expect. Shannon was blind at that stage, and she was completely dependent upon me. I didn't know how long I had her for. I knew that I was just going to try and do everything I could, but unfortunately where I was, which is outside Talbot, I was on the edge of about 4 different healthcare services, so there was no after hours help and there was no weekend help at all. So I just wasn't sure what was coming. I knew it was coming, I just didn't know how to help Shannon. So on the second day, Shannon had a bleed into her spine and she was in a lot of pain. Luckily enough, came into contact with Dr. Claire Hepper, who came out and helped Shannon and then sat with me for hours and talked me through some of the things that I could expect over the next couple of days, and some different things I could do to help Shannon as well too. And then being a typical male, I listened to about half of it. The next day, I rang Claire up again and said, "Can you come and tell me again?" I only took about half of that in, if that's okay. So she sat there again and went through everything with me. And she left me with an emergency symptom relief pack, which was just full of some medications and things that could help Shannon over the next couple of days, just to help with fear and anxiety and breathlessness, a bit of pain, things like that. I used that pack 4 times over the next 4 days. If I didn't, I would have had to take Shannon back into hospital and she would have died in hospital, which she didn't want to do. She's had enough time in hospital. So I was very thankful for that. On the day she died, she said, I love you and I'm glad I'm home, I'm comfy. And she said, "I want you to promise me that you'll help anyone, anywhere with anything." So I said, "That's a very easy promise to make, no worries at all." So she died in my arms later that night. A week later, bear on me and said, right, what do we do? What do we do here? I've got no medical experience whatsoever apart from helping Shannon. I was a firefighter for all of this. I spoke to Claire and we talked about getting some emergency symptom relief packs, which are basically just something to help the family, give a bit of confidence and give the patient a bit of confidence if they'd like to be at home. It's not to replace any of the medical services, doctors and nurses, we can't do that, but it's something to help in those areas that there mightn't be an after hours number, there mightn't be a nurse or anyone to call. So we started by raising money for about 2 packs. He thought, that's a good start, there we go, we've done something. And that quickly grew to 8, 10, 30, and I think now I would have 1,000 sort of going across Australia and overseas as well too. Doing a lot of these talks that we're doing today, it's great because we get to speak to people and find out some real things, and everyone's been through something. I love people who come up and ask me and have a chat to me as well too, and we did that all along the time that we were raising money for the packs. As we're doing so, people were coming up to us saying, you need to do more. You know, these packs are good, but they're a band-aid, and that's all they'll ever be. You need to do more. As a carer, I'm not telling anyone in the room to suck eggs, I know that. If you're a carer, that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's your job. There is just nothing else. Life stops, everything else stops, bills, shopping. We thought we actually need to put some people in place that can help these people, these carers, do some things as well too, even just the peripheral things like the shopping or cleaning or sitting with dad for an hour so that person can rest, or going and getting the medications, little things like that. That again seem little, but to that carer, to that family, they're huge, absolutely huge, because it gives them breathing space. We went through the whole very painful process of becoming a charity and getting insurances and all that proper stuff we're meant to do. It took us about 18 months to do. People who help us, volunteers, I think Claire and I were initially saying we need someone who can do some cooking, and maybe someone who can do transport, and maybe someone who can sit with someone. If you've got those 3 things, we're covered, that's all we need. Within the first training session, we had so much more. People just coming up with wonderful lived experience and some just backgrounds I hadn't even thought of, but when you speak to them, you think, that's amazing, that's really great. And yes, you can definitely help people. A lady said, I hate people, full stop. I don't like being around them, but I love pets. Can I help you at all? And we went, yep, that'd be awesome. So she goes and takes care of all the animals on the farm, so the farmers can go get their treatment, or so mum can go and take it easy for a while. There's always something that you can do, and we've been so lucky. They volunteer now for us for pet therapy, art therapy, music therapy, massage, Reiki, you name it. There's just people coming out of the woodwork saying, I've got something to give. And we moved into working with a lot of Lions and Rotaries and different groups that were talking to us as well too, and just give them the confidence to say, hey, what you're doing now in the community as far as going and sitting with someone, going and giving someone a meal, having a cup of tea with someone, mowing someone's lawn, that's what we do. Okay? There's no special talent to what we do. It's a matter of knowing and being there for that person and just having a chat to them, or being with them, or doing that one little job for them. From where we were to where we are has expanded exponentially. We've assisted about another 65 organisations like us to sort of start. Basically go to them and say, look, here's everything we've done from start to finish, including all of the mistakes we've made. And there's been a lot of those. It's hard to get started in this area. Where do I go? What do I do? Who do I talk to? What do the people need? What can I do? Got that all on a thumb drive, and we actually give them out to organisations and say, here you go. Here's our policies and procedures and insurances and everything else you need. Take our name off it, put yours on it, there you go. So everything we do is for free. From that grew so many things. So now we do a lot of advanced care planning. We also do a lot of equipment now. We didn't actually intend to move into that area, but it was just something that happened. We wanted to get a hospital bed, a wheelchair, the basics. When people are in hospital, it might be a limiting factor to get them home, and that the hospitals won't let someone home unless they've got a hospital bed or a sit to stand or a wheelchair or a hoist, something like that. So we fundraise for a little bit. But now we work with aged care facilities and hospitals all over Victoria who give us all of their second-hand equipment. We do that up and give it out to anyone who needs it, be it a family member, an organisation, places like health services out the back of Burke, literally in Burke, that just didn't have any money or funding. So I think last year we've given out about $1 million worth of equipment, and that's still growing for us as well too. We're not a service, we'll never be a service, and we're not even going to try to replace wonderful medical service we're out there, but there are lots of gaps within the IS or my aged care, and especially with COVID, things are taking longer and longer and longer for people to get things. It might be funding to help them around the house, it might be for equipment. So we step in where we need to, and we do a lot of overseas work now, which we didn't expect to do. We work with Rotary and send a lot of our equipment overseas to Fiji and Russia and Germany and places like that as well, wherever it's sort of needed, basically. There's an amazing amount of goodness just in communities and just in societies. It amazes me every day. I still struggle of a day missing the little girl. Every single day I have to wake up and think of a reason to keep breathing. But you talk to good people who are doing good things and helping so many good people, and you can't help but think this is a pretty good world, this one. It's not too bad at all. All the goodness that we see all around us, that's what keeps us going. It's been wonderful to see what's happened and where we're going. So thank you very much for having us.
And my name's John Eddy, and I just wanted to stand up here a bit longer than I actually have to. So I'm just going to warn you all because I'm going to swear. The word I'm going to use begins with S. It's suicide, and I was really glad to hear a teacher say it not long ago. When I was 15, I lost my mother to suicide, and I was treated like I had leprosy, and I didn't have leprosy or COVID or anything else. A little over 2 years ago, William Barrett and Sons and Larissa Knowles helped me lay my son to rest. He also took his life. I've lost other people in my family to suicide, and it very nearly claimed me as well. And I know many people in this room, I'm sure, have been affected by it in some way. I want to introduce you to someone. Her name is Nadia. Nadia is a journalist and a broadcaster with almost 30 years' experience in radio and television. She hosts the morning programs on ABC Radio. After completing a Bachelor of Arts degree, Nadia worked as a journalist on GWN and 10 Network, and then joined Associated Press in London as a producer. On her return, she became the state political reporter for 9 News. Nadia moved to the ABC Radio 2013, working initially as a producer before presenting the Focus and Breakfast programs. Nadia is a board member of Lifeline WA. I love Lifeline, they're great. The #1 ticket holder for West Coast Fever and a passionate advocate for suicide prevention. So please welcome Nadia Masopoulos. Thanks.
John, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. And I was thinking about what I would say today and my journey, and then I thought, my job and what I've seen and what I've experienced and the biases that I've had have probably had a very profound impact on the way, how I have navigated what at times have been a very difficult journey. And when I reflect back to when I first started in the media, which was actually here at GWN here in Bunbury back in 1991, and I love coming back. I have fond memories, and I particularly enjoy watching the milk carton come up from the horizon as I come into the town. I developed very quickly the thrill and the chase of a story, and I was probably your classic, what they would call ambulance chaser, be the first to the scene, have the edge on your competitors, get that extra piece of information, that extra piece of vision, the extra interview, the exclusive pictures. It was the hunger for a story, and it's very addictive, and it's what drove me. And it's also the nature of television. And I covered a lot over the years, and generally, no news is good news. And so over my 30 years, there's been a lot of tragedy. There's been a lot of death. There's been fatal car crashes and murders and drownings and missing people and all of those horrible stories that you watch on the news. And I think for a long time, the way we reported those kind of events was in isolation. So for me, it was that story. My first day working in Albany, 5 people were killed in a car crash. And then 5 weeks later in Katanning, another 4 in a single car crash. And then just out of Denmark, about 7 weeks later, another 3, and the police started calling me the Black Widow, saying, geez, what have you brought to our town? And then at that time, I started to get a little bit affected by this, and then it'd be like, oh, toughen up, you're a journo, you cover that story and then you move on the next day and you cover the next one. And that's pretty much what it was like. And the local forensic officer and the local Marine and Harbours guy said to me, why don't you come and have a look at an autopsy? Because there's a great idea for a 21-year-old. It'll detach you, and then you can separate the emotion. And like for you, it's just a dead body. So back of Albany Hospital, Saturday morning, 8 a.m, knocked on the door. Here I am for my autopsy. And I treated it like a science experiment. It was very interesting. I wouldn't say it was traumatic. I think I had already been at that point where I was able to detach myself. And I think that got me through, where I was able to see horrible, horrible things. And I was a compassionate person. I absolutely would feel for these people who were telling me their story about their loss and the tragedy and the impact that it had had on their families and their communities. But I could then quite happily put that away at the end of the day and move on to the next story, because it wasn't my story, didn't happen to me, I didn't know these people, and they'll be okay. And on I went for years and years and years, and I think most journos are probably like that. And when I talk about how you become very immune to the broader situation or conversation, and I think a good example, for instance, is family violence, because I would very much report these things, as I said, in silos, particularly in the 90s and the early 2000s. And family violence, for instance, many times we would be told, we would go to a house where there had been a death of a woman at the hand of her partner, and the policeman would say, it's just a domestic, mate. And I go, okay, just a domestic. And I noticed there was a police officer in the room, and I mean no respect to police officers, that's just the way it was. And I'm talking 30 years ago. Things are very, very different now. And so you'd either report in isolation, or you would relegate the relevance of that death because it was private and it happened in the home, or, it somehow, we thought that because it was a private domestic situation, it somehow lessened the seriousness of that crime. And if you did report them, again, we would never say, and by the way, there's been this many people who've been killed in family violence situations, and these are the help numbers that you need if you are in crisis. And it would be the same with suicide, for instance. So the Australian Journalists Association, we used to have a code of ethics when I first started, and it very clearly said that we would not report suicides because it would trigger copycats. So we rarely, rarely did, and many, many times you would be sent out to a job, and then 20 minutes later you'd be called back and say it's just a suicide, and you'd forget about it. Occasionally, high-profile person, Michael Hutchins, people like that, but again, we weren't giving out lifeline numbers, we weren't giving you any context about how many people have taken their lives in that year over the last 5 years or 10 years, and that's just the way it was. And then often when we would be going out because there's been we'd hear on the scanner in the newsroom that there's been a dead body, our attitudes were pretty appalling, and I'm pretty ashamed because my attitude was the same. You just go, it's just some crazy person that's jumped in front of a train, turn the car around and head back to the newsroom. And that was my view, and I'm ashamed to say it, but I'm being very honest with you. And so I think, again, I was able to detach myself because it wasn't my story, it wasn't my problem. So I want to take you back to the 12th of July 2000, and it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the Chief of Staff hears that there's police going out to the discovery of a dead body in a factory unit in Malaga. So he sends the crew out, and I was doing my story, which was a different story, and I kind of heard it at the corner of my eye, thought, oh, here we go, it always happens late in the day. And then after about half an hour, I heard the Chief of Staff say, come back, it's just a suicide. Well, that factory unit was my father's, and that dead body was my dad. I didn't know at the time. I found out about 2 hours later. It's okay, I've got one if I need it. And when I got the phone call to say, can you go to Mum's, Dad's passed away, I was convinced that I'd been told Dad had passed out. And so when I went there, and there's a police car there, and then we're told the news, and I think I felt like somebody got a plank of wood and smacked me across the head, and you had that foggy dizziness that hung around for quite a long time, like I'm talking years. You go through the shock, and the disbelief, and that lasts a while, but almost immediately, I felt embarrassed and I felt ashamed. What would people say? What are people going to think? Do they think that he didn't love us? Are they think that we did something wrong? Did we say something? Then you want, because you want to, there was a stigma about it. We didn't talk about it. We never spoke about suicides. We didn't report them. We completely discarded them. And then I was worried that people were going to start being judgmental. If I felt that way, then I assumed that everybody else would feel that way. And then you get angry. How could he do this to us? What did he think we would feel if he did this to us? How could he do it? What was he thinking? How selfish. Why didn't he talk to us? Didn't he know how it would hurt us, that it would leave us behind? No note, no explanation, no reason that we could see. And obviously there are, and you find all the things out, it's a journey of discovery, but then you get the guilt. How could we not have known something was wrong? How blind were we? Did we not notice things that he said or things that he did, or how did we fail him? This is completely our fault. For me, the grief came a lot later. I was absorbed with all of that, and particularly what people would think and what people would say. And I really couldn't face the reality of that. I didn't talk about it a lot. And when I went back to work, I actually told people that my dad had died of a heart attack, because I just couldn't face what people would say and what people would think, because I just assumed that everyone was going to be talking about it, which they were. But, we all talk about people, and then next day we move on and find someone else. It's human nature, and I feel no ill will to anyone. This is 2000. Very different to where we're at now. And so I think about what didn't help, and it was, as everybody started coming to the house, why? Well, if we knew why, we would tell you, but we didn't know why. And that was the first thing that every single person would say. Why? Did you have financial problems? We called the doctor. Did he have cancer? Did you give him some sort of a diagnosis that he didn't want to face? Somebody said, my dad was an electrician. I saw a house burnt down in East Perth, and I believe it was an electrical fault. Did your dad do that? And again, it is human nature. You just want an answer for something. And I think for us, if he had just, I would always say, if he just died of cancer, if he'd fallen off a ladder, or if he'd been hit by a car, it would have been so much easier, because we could just say it was bad luck and it was nobody's fault, and we could just move on. And I dreaded the day. And I remember in that sort of first week or two, I told a couple of people sort of at work before I'd come back to work, look, this is what happened, but I really, please don't say anything. Please don't say anything. And then it was about a month or so later, and then one of my colleagues came up and she pulled me into a room and said, look, I just want to let you know, I know how your father died. And that was it. I was a complete mess. It was just like I couldn't stay. I had to go home. I just thought, I do not want to deal with this. And all those emotions were still there, the guilt, the shame, the people will judge me. So I hadn't even dealt with the grief. And then after a while I thought, okay, do you know what? He's not here. And so at the end of the day, the loss is the loss, regardless of how he went. He's not here. And so that's what I'll focus on, rather than all of this other stuff that I can't deal with and I don't know how to process. And I didn't ask for help. He's left, and the way he died didn't matter. And that's what I decided that I would move on with. And so while I didn't speak a lot about it at work, and when I did meet people and they'd say, if it ever came up, I'm sorry you lost your father, how did he die? Just say heart attack. It was just easier. And it's funny because when I look at the title of what I was meant to talk about today, it was about what helped. And really at the time, probably not a lot, but then I didn't seek it. But having said that, the wonderful Neil Darby, who is on the cameraman over there, we worked together for a long time, and Darbs actually was at Channel 9 at the time when this happened, and he reminded me, because we spent half our lives in the car together doing jobs and interviews and whatnot, and he said, I remember when we'd go on a job and you'd say, let me just go and check on Mum, just make sure Mum's okay, because she lived very close to Channel 9. And so on the way home to the newsroom, Darbs would nick into Mum's, go on out, you go and make sure she's okay. And so when I think about the things that helped, that was probably the biggest help at the time that I had, with no questions, no probing. It was just, it's a very close relationship, the relationship between a journo and a camo. So thanks, Darbs. I don't think I ever did thank you for that. So yes, well done. But a few years later, my mum said, we were talking about it, as we always do, and we tried to find the last person that saw Dad alive and try to put all the pieces together, and that was a work in progress for many, many years. But I remember Mum said to me, pride killed your father. And it was like the penny dropped. And I thought, my God, of course it matters how he died. Of course it matters how he died, because this is preventable. This was completely a preventable death. Had we known, had we talked about it, all those things that you've all talked about today. And then I thought, okay, that's, this, I think I've hit something here. It absolutely matters how he died. And so over the years, I still didn't seek help, and I probably should have, to be honest, but I didn't, and, you move on. But then I did start to, maybe 5, 6, 7 years later, be in a conversation where somebody would talk about your family, whatever, and say, oh no, my father died. How did he die? Oh, it was actually a suicide. Oh, I'm really sorry about that. That wasn't so bad. I didn't get the whys. I didn't get that. Attitudes were starting to change. So we're talking, 10 years later, suddenly it's like, actually, this is an okay thing to talk about. And so I sort of started to look through things, through a different lens, and then, I sort of started to feel a little more comfortable talking about it because other people were probably. I think it was, I'd pick my people, and if it came up and it felt comfortable, like today, I would sort of mention it. Didn't need to have a deep conversation about it, but I slowly started to notice that attitudes were starting to change. And then suddenly people were talking about Lifeline and Beyond Blue, and suddenly as part of our reporting we had to put those numbers on the news, and suddenly when we're reporting suicides we're telling you how many people die from a suicide every week or in the last year, and if you're in crisis ring this number. And I think those conversations that started to happen around me, I started to kind of run with that, and that I think is where that's how I got my help, and it was the changing attitudes of other people around me. But it took me a long time to notice it and a long time to sort of understand it and embrace it. And then suddenly I just kind of looked at things a little bit differently when I was reporting these kind of deaths and tragedies and then wanting to put suicide on the agenda, and we needed to do stories about this, and we needed to talk about mental health and the failings in the system and all these people that need help. And TV was great, but then I discovered radio and I moved into ABC, and I think that gave me the forum to be able to do this, because a lot of people think talkback radio is just full of people whinging and complaining and ringing up to have a go at someone, but it actually is very powerful because it gives you the time to have these conversations, sharing experiences, learning from other people, and is providing a forum for people to share their stories and feel comfortable. Because there's no greater relief, I can tell you, no greater relief when you hear somebody say, I know exactly how you feel. And not long after my dad died, we had a family friend come up to us who basically told us that her son, who we thought had died from an asthma attack, had actually taken his life about 30 years earlier. And I was relieved. I was like, oh, thank God. She had no appetite to talk about it anymore, but I took comfort in knowing that, okay, we're not alone here. I just have to find some more people that are willing to share their stories. And that is the beauty, I think, of what I do now, is that I can provide that platform and that forum and have those challenging conversations. And that's probably helped me a lot, I think, over the last few years, and healed me a lot. And I've spent a lot of time talking about suicide. I don't talk about my dad on radio. My mum's asked me not to do that, and I'll respect that. And this is only the second time I've spoken about him in this sort of forum, so thank you. It means I'm feeling comfortable around you. But we do have to have these conversations, and we have to encourage them. Thank you, that's very kind. So I want to give mental health, that platform. And Don, I'm sorry, but your government's got a lot of work to do in that space, desperately underfunded, and a lot that needs to be fixed up. And some of the people that I've spoken to that have shared their stories, I get it now, and I feel that I can tell their stories better, regardless of what it is, because of what I've been through and because I understand about grief and I understand about loss and blame and shame and all of those emotions that controlled me for so long. And it's, as I said, it's not just about mental health, it's about family violence. It's about end of life. And Lana has come on and spoken about palliative care, and we've talked about voluntary assisted dying. Now, they are difficult conversations, and we spent a whole hour a couple of weeks ago talking about voluntary assisted dying, but you cannot have that conversation without conversation about palliative care. Again, desperately underfunded area. It can be done better, and it is being done better. But these are conversations that scared people, and it's a conversation that scared me. But they're connecting us. And I think it's generational too. I think that maybe we have seen our parents, my generation, and things, and we want things to be different no matter how your grief or your loss or the death that you saw a family member endure. I just think that I just feel there's more of an appetite to talk about these conversations. Maybe it's also there's more forums for it too. There's that, and forums like this, forums at like radio, and it is connecting us. I spoke to a woman. I had the mental health minister in a couple of years ago. We were doing this whole thing on mental health, and particularly the child and adolescent health service and the failings there. And this lady called, and she lost a 16-year-old to suicide. And she said to the health minister, Roger Cook, mental health minister at the time, I just felt like getting my daughter's body and laying it on the steps of Parliament so you could listen to me and understand what I'm going through. And these stories of desperation are finally being told, and I'm privileged that I'm able to help share them. And I thank all those people that also have, trusted me to share their stories. I have one of my best mates, and she lost her husband 2 years ago. He took his life on Christmas Eve, and her son and my son are best mates. And so we had to break that news to our children, and that's when I told my children about my dad. Never talked to them about it. And I said to my husband, the time will come, it will feel right. There'll be a moment where I'll be able to do it. And now we have a lot of conversations about mental health, well-being, grief, loss, needing to talk about things, sharing emotions, because I've got a 14-year-old son, and you know what they're like, they just grunt at you. And they were really shocked, but also quite grateful. And then there was a lot of questions, and I was very encouraged by that. Lots and lots of questions. Lifeline has also come along for me as well. I'm on the board of Lifeline WA. They do amazing, amazing things. And the vision at Lifeline, of course, is that, we do hope and believe that we can create a community free of suicide, but that's a long way away. And just to give you some context, suicide is the leading cause of death for Australians between the ages of 15 and 44. And you just have to think about that for a moment. It's not car crashes, it's suicide. These are young people who had an entire life ahead of them, who had so much to contribute. People like John's son. And in the last 12 months, 418 Western Australians have taken their own lives. That's one a day, and some. One a day. And in fact, on Monday, just gone, Lifeline nationally received 3,345 calls in one day, and that is a record in the history of Lifeline, as half the country is in lockdown. So to say that we're in a mental health crisis is an absolute understatement. And on that note, I'm going to wind it up, but I just want to say thank you very much, and I just hope that you support these conversations, which clearly you do because you're all here, and that you take a moment to think about those people, those families who have been affected by suicide. There will be many more. And people like John, it's not just happened once in his family, it's happened twice, and it hurts and it lives with you forever. But if we can have these conversations, then we're certainly making some progress. So thank you very much. And I just want to tell you that Leanne, Where are you, Leanne? Will be on the program on Monday after 10:30 on ABC Radio Perth. So please tune in, because we're going to continue this conversation about compassionate communities and grief and loss and how to talk about it. And if you want to call in and share your story, you can do that on 1300 222 720. Thank you.
I've come to realise that storytelling is the language that makes the biggest difference. And you all have a story, so please start sharing it. And Nadia, thank you so much for sharing your story. We now have our wonderful compassionate community volunteer, Felicity, and she's going to introduce our next speaker.
Hello, it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm a grief and loss counsellor, and I'm really hoping that from conversations that start today, you will put me out of a job, because through community, we'll then reach into our towns and our suburbs and our streets, and I won't be needed anymore, because when there's that need there, everyone will embrace that person and we'll move forward. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Shelley Skinner. With a passion and commitment for working with children and their families following the death of a loved one, Shelley is committed to working towards building a community where grief is seen as a healthy and positive response to a death and life challenges. She wants everyone to be taught the skills to grieve in a healthy and safe way. As the recipient of the 2020 Don Curtin Medal, Shelley strives to raise awareness of the importance of grief and literature in our children. We're very, very lucky. Shelley will be talking to Carla and her daughter Serena in a question and answer on dealing with the loss of their loved son and brother. Shelley?
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us come along. My name is Shelley. I'm a social worker who worked with families and young people through end of life for a long time, and was asked the question, who's going to help my partner look after the kids, or who's going to help them tell the kids? And I would complain and complain and complain and moan and complain until somebody once said, "Is that all you're going to do about it?" And I thought, okay, fine. Let's do something about it. And so Lionheart began. And Lionheart began because I knew that there was a lot of supports for children in WA if your family member had died from cancer, as there should be. Great support, you all do an amazing job, well done. But if your family member dies of something that is not cancer related, there was very little support available. So I want to thank Carla and Serena for coming along, in particular Serena, because at Lionheart we don't do a lot of sitting and chatting, so it's weird to us that there's no glitter and glue and dirt and mud and craft. But I wanted to say thank you very much, and we thought this would be a good opportunity to let the community know how you can help and what might have helped these guys and what did help. So who wants to start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Carla. I am a mum of 4 children. So I had my 3 daughters. Yep. So I have 3 daughters, and then I had my son. My son was born with an extremely rare disease that we didn't know about at the time. So when Harley was born, he was critically ill. Our entire life changed. Serena had just started kindy, so we thought, okay, well, what do we do now? So my husband had to leave his job, which at the time he was FIFO, and our new life began, which was RFDing up to PCH, all the time. Well, it was PMH back then. It was ambulances at a drop of a hat. It was the girls not knowing if mum and dad were going to be home, if they were at school. It was wondering if Harley was going to be alive by the end of the day. It was medical equipment at home. It was oxygen. It was resuscitating him every single night. It was a long, nearly 3 years, but it was also something that changed us. It changed us as people, and we became closer and we learned to talk, and that's when I guess our grief literacy kind of started, because we had to explain to the girls what death was. We had to sit down with them and go, you know what, Harley is sick, and yes, he is going to die one day. Is it going to be today? Is it going to be next week? Is it going to be in 10 years? We did not know. So we had to talk to them about what grief was. We had to talk to them about what happens after you die. So before Harley even died, or we were at that stage, we spoke to him about that. Harley's going to die one day. What does that look like to you? And we talked about the difference between cremations and funerals, and it was actually Serena that chose to cremate Harley. As a 5-year-old at the time, she's like, I want you to burn his body because I don't want the bugs to eat his eyes. And that's how he got cremated. But she wanted somewhere to go. So as a child, children needed, in our family, children needed to go somewhere to grieve. Like, they could feel him around, they knew he was around when he was going to go, but he needed somewhere else. So we also then buried his ashes. So when we're having a moment or when we're not coping, we can all go out and we go and sit with Harley, or on his birthday we take him a cake and we sing happy birthday and we deliver him presents, and he's quite still a big part of our life. But it was the most important thing throughout that whole journey, was to talk and to be honest, because, you know, if I said to them, oh, Harley's never going to die, then that day he dies, they're going to go to me, you told me he didn't die. Like, how can I trust you? Because the one thing that I needed you to be honest with me, you didn't. So I think out of everything, the biggest thing is to be honest and keep that communication honest. Like, but it doesn't have to, you don't have to talk to your children as you're talking to an adult. Like, as I said, during this conversation, her logic of thinking, that's how it was in her eyes. So yes, and then here we are today.
Serena, are you happy to tell us a little bit about what it was like to have a brother who was sick?
When Harley was born, I was only 4, turning 5. I knew he was very sick and I had to help my family more than anything in the world. I missed a lot of school, and when I was at school, I was worried he was going to die while I was not there.
Do you feel like you knew what it was going to be like when he died? Do you feel like you knew what to expect?
I knew he was going to die as soon as we spoke about it as a family, all the time. However, I don't think anyone can really be prepared to watch their brother die, and to know what death really feels like unless have gone through it already.
What do you think the community, your school, your friends, extended family, what could they have done better to support you, and what did they do that you think that helped?
Some more understanding in school. When I was at school, I didn't have the ability to focus, and no one was able to pick that up because I am a quietest child at school. When Harley died, no one knew how to treat us and didn't speak of our brother.
What is it like after your brother dies in getting about in your daily life? Normal things like going to school and sleeping and all of those things. What was that like?
School was the hardest. I lost focus, friends, I have struggled, and I have always felt so lonely. I didn't sleep well. It takes me ages to go to sleep, and I wake up many times overnight.
What did you find easy about life after Harley died? Were there any things that were easy to get on with?
I didn't feel normal. I felt different and isolated.
So many kids tell us that they feel like they're the only one, either the only one in their class or the only one in their school, or the only one in their friendship circle.
Yeah.
That was a big thing for Serena. She felt like nobody understood what it was like to lose a brother. So she felt very stuck.
What was the hardest thing, do you think, Serena, after Harley died?
I felt lost. I knew Harley needed to go. He was hurting and pain here, and he didn't want me to be sad. I felt like I lost my purpose in life as I used to help with his care. I felt like I should have saved him as I was his big sister.
That sounds like a lot of responsibility. Do you feel like there was extra responsibility for you when Harley was sick and also after Harley died?
I felt that my responsibility decreased. Harley was my world. I was young when Harley died, so I thought my parents were superheroes. They seemed to keep managing everything.
How do you think the community did and could have helped you and your family best after Harley died?
I think there needs to be more free support for children. Children and families in grief and education to help the kids learn missed information from school.
What do you think parents need after they have a child who dies? How do you think we could have helped your parents better, or who do you think and what do you think helped them best?
I am not too sure, but I knew there was a huge financial strain on my parents after Harley died. Dad had to go back to work before we were all ready. They had to pay for some therapy for me as I was really struggling.
What would you like teachers and schools to know about grieving kids?
Give us time to heal. Talk to us. Our brain is foggy and we just need the school work given to us slowly.
And what would you like parents of your friends and parents in the community to know?
Please explain to your children that we can have good days and bad days no matter how long it's been, and to try and encourage them to be there for us. Talk about our siblings. Understand that they are still part of our family.
And you've done a fab job. One last question. What would you like the whole community and the whole world to know about supporting grieving kids? How can we all do it better?
Say their loved one's name. Talk to them. Really show you care. Give us time to grieve. My mum and dad always say it's okay to be sad, but it's okay to be happy. Through the years, we have had good days and bad days. On our good days, it doesn't mean that we aren't thinking of our loved ones, because everything I do, Harley is always on my mind.
Now, Mum. So you were planning to have your fourth baby. So firstly, you're crazy. And secondly, that sounds like a very, very busy household anyway. So Harley was born and he was born with extra needs. What was that like? Who helped and how did they help, and what was it like for you and your family?
To be honest, it was all such a whirlwind. We didn't know. Nobody knew. Nobody picked it up through pregnancy. When he was born, they just thought he was small, and then he stopped breathing, and we got RFD'd up, and then they couldn't find anything, so we got sent home. And 3 days later, we were RFD'd up and spent 2 weeks up doing tests and couldn't find anything, so sent back home. And then I think we were home for 2 days and we were RFD'd back again. So it was just to and fro for a very long time. But I think it was it was his 14 weeks age was when he had his biggest crash, and he completely stopped breathing, and my husband was back at work by this stage, and I was resuscitating him, and the ambulances were trying to get to him, and I was trying to organise people to come and grab the girls, and it was just a nightmare, really. It was like living in a movie. So at the start, nobody really kind of knew what to do. I think the biggest help was people being there at the drop of a hat going, the ambulance is on the way, can someone just get here to watch the kids till I can organise to get them up to the hospital with me. It was scary for us, but it was also scary for our friends and our family. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew how to treat us. I think in their eyes, they thought staying away was better because we had so much on, but really it isolated us a lot more. We felt alone. It was a really horrible time to start with. Like, I had my nan, she came down for a bit and then went because we didn't think he was that sick, and then our whole world changed, and that's when we actually moved up to Ronald McDonald House, and we lived up there for quite a while, and I think that was our saving grace, living at Ronald McDonald House. And the girls moved up and went to the school down the road, and Michaela went to the daycare at the hospital, and it was the place where we went, we belong here. There's people that are going through similar. All of our stories were completely different. You know, there was burn victims, there was cancer victims, there was absolutely victims from absolutely every walk of life, mental health. But we all belonged together, and that was what helped us get through. It made us feel part of a family.
It sounds like the most unsettling and kind of confusing time, and I can't imagine how you would have even known what it was you wanted or what you needed at that time, because every day was uncertain. You were living away from home. You had all these kids you were juggling. What were some of the things that people did that helped you guys best during either the time at Ronald McDonald or after Harley died?
As you said, it's a tricky one. It's one of those times where you want to be left alone, but you want people to check in on you. Like, you don't have the ability to go, hey, come down to this party or come out for a drink, because you can't. But for somebody just to send a message going, hey, I'm thinking of you guys, I hope you're all right, or hey, I cooked an extra dinner tonight, or just drop it off in your front door. We had a few of those that really, really helped. After Harley passed, our paediatrician, she was amazing, actually, even through his life. At first, the Bunbury community didn't want us to come home because of Harley's needs, so they weren't going to actually let us home at all, and our paed actually stood up in a meeting and went, no, this family, this is their home, we need to support this. So she let us come home. She checked in on us throughout the whole time of Harley's life, including the 3 days that he was dying at home. She was out checking on him and whatnot. And then once he passed, she actually took my husband and I out for a coffee and cake, just to say, here's a coffee and cake, practically. And we sat by the beach, and we didn't even talk about Harley's death or anything. It was just a chat, and that was really nice, just to be people again.
Yeah. So I really want to ask, what did that feel like to have a sense of being told that Harley couldn't come home? Like, he wasn't able to be cared for in your community, or not he wasn't welcome, but that's where you all felt like you belonged and he couldn't be there.
Yep, we didn't feel welcome, to be honest. It was heartbreaking. This was our home, this is where our animals were, this was where we owned our house, this is where the girls had made friends, and we had set down roots, really. And to know that we were never never coming back was heartbreaking. Like, I'm not a city person, so I've been down the country my entire life, so it was like, wow, what do we do here? Like, what do we do? Do we sell our house? Do we move? Like, then how do we afford this? Because no one's going to give us a loan. We're both not allowed to work because Harley's needs were so high. We were just like, what do we do now? Like, how do we support our kids? How do we live? It was a nightmare.
And I guess that's why these conversations and the fact that you're all here on a Saturday is so important and so rich and valuable in the community. One last question. If you had a magic wand, what would the system look like? What would the community look like? What would the world look like for supporting grieving mums and grieving families and grieving kids?
Talk. Check in, let the mum know that you're there. Being a mum who loses a child leaves an amazing, huge hole in your heart. It doesn't go away. You feel empty all the time. Even though I've got these 3 other beautiful children who I love dearly, and that doesn't change, but you still got that spot where that child was and always will be. I guess as a parent, you kind of go on by trying to protect your other children, but watching them struggle You know, the girls missed so much of school. There was nothing around. No one goes, hey, have you tried these people? Have you heard of this? It was 2 years later that we actually heard about Lionheart, and as soon as I heard about them, I was straight on the phone to Shelley. And funnily enough, this day, 3 years ago, we were actually at Lionheart. And that was the best thing ever. Poor Shelley had tried to tee it up that there was going to be another family who had lost a child there, but they didn't end up turning up, unfortunately. So we were there with everybody else who had lost a parent, which was really, really good for the girls because they could still see that other people grieved, but they were still back to that, I'm the only one that's lost a brother. So there needs to be more open conversation, more community support, more understanding, and more, especially in school. I think school is the biggest thing. Actually, watching what some schools are doing, I just went, why weren't my kids at those schools? I was like, wow, those initiatives that those schools that have started have taken on is amazing. I wish they were around 5 years ago when Harley passed away, because they are the key. These kids need the help in school. As Serena said, all three of the girls are so far behind in school because they weren't learning. Yes, they were sitting there in body sometimes, but their brain wasn't there. Like the times that I did pick them up from school, it was, where's Harley? Is he home? Has the ambulance been today? Is he going back to hospital? So that proved to me, yeah, they were sitting there, but they didn't listen to a word that teacher said that day. And because they didn't have any diagnosis, they didn't get the support. So I think we really need to just expand it, have some more of these. Like, it'd be so good to see more allied health people come to these and more teachers, and just really spread that word out.
Yeah. Thank you both so much.
Yeah.
It's so brave. And in particular, thank you, Serena. It was incredibly brave of you to sit in front of this many people, tell your story. But I know that it's people like Serena who have this lived experience who are going to make the biggest difference in the world moving forward. Serena's also written letters to her members of parliament. So if Serena has her way, there will definitely be change in the future. Thank you all so much.
Wonderful, thank you.